Hello everyone! Welcome to Untold History, where we explore the lesser-known episodes of history. Today we travel to 16th century Spain to learn about the Alpujarras Rebellion, an uprising that took place between 1568 and 1571 and was one of the most significant conflicts in the Iberian Peninsula after the Reconquista. This revolution took place in a context of increasing repression against the Moriscos, the Muslims who had been forced to convert to Christianity after the conquest of Granada in 1492. The Kingdom of Granada, the last Muslim stronghold on the peninsula, fell to the troops of the Catholic monarchs, Isabella of Castile and Ferdinand of Aragon, putting an end to more than 7 centuries of Islamic presence in Al-Andalus. Initially, the Muslims of Granada were allowed to maintain their religion, culture, and language under a series of agreements with the Catholic monarchs. They were guaranteed the right to continue to practice Islam, speak Arabic, and follow its customs. However, these promises of tolerance were soon broken. In 1499, under pressure from Cardinal Cisneros, he began a campaign of forced conversions to Christianity, with the aim of eliminating any trace of Islam in the peninsula. Many converted, but secretly continued to practice their Islamic faith. Despite their efforts to maintain their traditions, distrust of them grew over the decades. In 1567, King Philip II, grandson of the Catholic monarchs, promulgated the Pragmatics, a set of laws that forbade the Moors from speaking Arabic, dressing according to their customs, using Arabic names, and practicing any form of their religious rituals. The purpose of these laws was the complete assimilation of the Moors into Christian culture and the definitive eradication of their Islamic identity. Already subjected to a series of abusive taxes and widespread distrust, they were now forced to give up the few aspects of their culture that they had managed to preserve. These policies of repression were the spark that ignited the rebellion. In 1568, the Moors of the Alpujarras rose up in arms against King Philip II. The rebellion was led by Ibn Humayya, a Moorish nobleman whose birth name was Fernando de Valor. Although he had been baptized as a Christian, he maintained deep connections to his Muslim heritage and was proclaimed King of the Moors by the rebels. Their aim was to restore rights and freedoms, defend their culture, and, if possible, re-establish Islam in Granada. The uprising began in the Alpujarras Mountains, where the Moors took advantage of their knowledge of the terrain to organize ambushes and surprise attacks against the royal forces. Guerrilla warfare was their main tactic during the first months of the rebellion, and they managed to inflict several defeats on the royal forces. The early victories of the Moors inspired other communities in the Granada region and beyond to join the uprising. In some areas, they managed to take temporary control of towns and villages, expelling local authorities and re-establishing their religious practices. However, the rebellion was also marked by episodes of extreme violence, both by the Moors and the royal troops. As the conflict dragged on, reprisals by both sides became more brutal, and the war took on a character of ethnic and religious revenge. One of the most tragic aspects of the rebellion was the internal division within the Moorish community. Although many Moors were willing to fight for their freedom, others chose to collaborate with the Christian authorities or simply try to survive. This lack of unity weakened the rebel movement from the beginning. In addition, the Moriscos hoped to receive external support from the Muslim powers of the Mediterranean, in particular the Ottoman Empire. However, this support never arrived on the expected scale. The Ottomans, engaged in their own wars against the Habsburgs in Central Europe and with internal problems, were unable to offer direct intervention in the Iberian Peninsula. Although some Barbary pirates and mercenaries arrived on the shores of Almeria to help the rebels, it was not enough to change the course of the conflict. As the rebellion dragged on, Philip II decided to send one of his best generals, Don Juan de Austria, the king's half-brother, to put down the rebellion. Don Juan, who would later become famous for his victory at the Battle of Lepanto against the Ottomans, adopted a strategy of brutal repression to put an end to the Moorish resistance. His troops launched a scorched earth campaign, destroying villages, burning crops, and executing any Moors suspected of supporting the rebellion. Despite fierce resistance, the military superiority of the Spanish forces and their policy of reprisals eventually crushed the uprising. By 1570, the rebellion was suppressed, although some pockets of resistance remained in the more remote areas of the Alpujarras. The end of the rebellion was as brutal as the conflict itself. After the defeat of the Moriscos, thousands of them were deported from the region of Granada and dispersed to other parts of Spain, mainly in rural areas of Castile, Extremadura and Aragon, in an attempt to prevent them from reorganizing. In addition to deportations, reprisals included mass executions and the enslavement of many Moriscos, who were sold into slavery both in Spain and in other Habsburg-controlled territories. It is estimated that between 80,000 and 90,000 Moors were expelled after the defeat of the rebellion. Kingdom of Granada, which had been a flourishing cultural and economic center under Muslim rule, was devastated and depopulated, and many of its lands were confiscated by the crown and given to nobles loyal to Philip II. The Alpujarra Rebellion was one of the most tragic episodes in the history of the Iberian Peninsula and left a lasting mark on the collective memory of Spain. Although the rebellion failed in its goal of restoring Islam in Granada, it revealed the deep religious and cultural tensions that continued to exist on the peninsula after the Reconquista. It also exposed the contradictions of the policy of forced assimilation, which only succeeded in exacerbating the alienation of the Moriscos and their desire to resist. The long-term impact of the revolution was significant. Despite efforts to disperse them and assimilate them into Christian society, distrust of them never disappeared. In the decades that followed, they continued to be seen as an internal threat, and in 1609, during the reign of Philip III, the crown made the decision to expel all Moriscos from Spain. This mass expulsion, which affected some 300,000 Moriscos, was one of the largest forced population movements in the history of Europe and marked the end of the significant presence of Islam in the Iberian Peninsula. On a cultural level, this was a decisive episode in the configuration of Spanish national identity. Forced Christianization and the repression of religious diversity were fundamental to the development of the concept of a Catholic and unified Spain, in contrast to the religious plurality that had characterized Al-Andalus for centuries. In short, this is a story of struggle for identity, resistance in the face of oppression, and the tragic fate of a people who, despite their efforts to preserve their culture and religion, were ultimately defeated and expelled from the land they had inhabited for centuries. Thank you for joining us again. If you liked this episode, don't forget to subscribe and activate the bell for more fascinating stories in Untold Story. See you in the next one.